guys have Minnesota sports flowing in their veins. Mackey and Judd on Score North and ScoreNorth.com.
Anthony Barr, Mike Zimmer's talked about how his health is paramount, getting ready for week one. What's your confidence level that that's going to be the case?
Well, I'm not sure what today. I can't tell you if he's going to be ready week one or not. He's doing everything he can rehab wise to get back in there, and hopefully we have him week one. If not, we'll have somebody step in and play for us.
I feel like Adam Zimmer wasn't supposed to say that.
Au contraire. I think he's been given. I think his dad gave him the green light to say that.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Because don't forget, Mike told us on Saturday night, I am concerned. I'm not concerned about the football player. I'm concerned about his health. No, I think this is. I think Adam. At first, I thought he wasn't supposed to say that, but I think he was sort of told, "Hey, you know what? Go ahead and throw this out." Because you know what Mike
saying
does.
they're throwing Anthony Barr under the bus? Is that what
Mike's
you're
done
saying?
it before. Mike's done it before.
Yeah. He loves Anthony Barr. He doesn't throw
him under
Barr
the bus before.
Really?
Yeah, like what? 5 years ago, he basically said something.
Well, he said he
about
wasn't
his
trying
effort.
hard, or he was like coasting. Yeah, you're right. Okay.
That's throwing a guy under.
I guess he
that's
did.
That's the worst thing you can say about a football player.
You're right. He did. He literally called Anthony Barr kind of lazy on the football field.
He
right?
wants to call the offensive line soft.
SAWFT. Soft. This is Mackey and Judd, daily Minnesota sports entertainment, presented today by Federated Mutual Insurance Company. If you're a business out there, just make sure that you have all of the protection and resources you need to maximize your business and to minimize risks and intruders. You got your offensive line. Hopefully it's better than the Vikings was last year. That's Federated. The defense on the other side are things that could happen to your business. Make sure you have a good offensive front. Federatedinsurance.com. And remember, at Federated, it's our business to protect yours. All right, so I rarely start things on Twitter, as you guys know.
No, not you.
I very rarely mix it up on Twitter. Yeah.
Never done that.
No, it's maybe a couple times a year, maybe. So I tweeted. I just feel like, and I have probably held this sentiment more than Judd over the years. I feel like people get so amped and ready to fire Mike Zimmer, right? Like just fire. Something goes wrong, it's like you got to get a different, younger coach in here, and Eric Bieniemy and this and that, and I'm not fully disagreeing with that. I would love a more offensive-minded, modern head coach. I would love someone who has a relationship with his starting quarterback, for one. Like I watch Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford look at each other like it's their first date every time they're at practice and rave about each other, and I wish that Mike Zimmer and Kirk Cousins had some sort of relationship. So I do wish those things. But when you start to look at the actual data and the facts, Mike Zimmer as a head coach going into his 8th season with the Vikings is 64, 47, and 1. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's like the 7th best winning percentage if you look at like the longest tenured coaches that have been around for at least 3+ years. It's one of the top 6 or 7 winning percentages in the NFL. And the other guys ahead of him are mostly Super Bowl winners, if not all Super Bowl winners. So, on one hand, he's the only one without a Super Bowl, and at some point it's time to go. It's time to do something deep into the playoffs. His train wreck seasons are 7-9. Like last year was kind of a train wreck. They start 1-5. And I think much to the chagrin of us and a lot of other people, it would have been nice to have a top 5 draft pick and then reset. Like, why would you want to go through the trouble of finishing 7-9 when you could have finished 3-13, had a better draft pick? But he coaches his teams up. They're competitive. And so I think my question to you guys is, are we too quick to just throw Mike Zimmer on a hot seat this season? Is it one of these things where we should be careful what we're wishing for, putting Mike Zimmer on a hot seat?
I think that's a very complicated question, because I think the answer is not just yes or no. I think the answer resides in the expectations of this team, where they were as far back now as 2017. The decision, which was made by Spielman, clearly not Mike, to sign Cousins, to bring in a quarterback who was supposed to in 2018 put you over the top. That was not a hey, I hope this all works out great in 3 years. That wasn't an immediate move. There's also the conversation about the life expectancy as far as your tenure as a coach goes. Now, the Steelers are super weird that they've had 3 coaches since 1969. But I mean, the shelf life thing for most organizations and teams is real. So does Mike Zimmer deserve to be fired because he's a bad coach? Let's take that question first. The answer is no. Mike Zimmer is a good football coach. Does he have blind spots? Absolutely.
Bill Belichick has blind spots as an evaluator, right?
Yes, and Mike, when it comes to coaching or caring about or being invested in offense in a league, which by the way sells offense constantly, is a blind spot, I think.
Yeah.
But he knows how to coach defense. Is he a bad overall coach? Again, he's got some blind spots, but no, he's not. So if the question is simply, should Mike Zimmer be replaced because he's not good at what he does, which some coaches should be? There have been a lot of guys who have ascended from coordinator to head coach, and they were fantastic coordinators. But do I see a path this year where a lot of important people are possibly in jeopardy? Absolutely. But no, Mike Zimmer, like if the argument is he's just a bad coach, I disagree completely with that.
Where are you at with this, Dex?
I am pretty staunch Mike Zimmer defender. I like what he's been able to do. Yes. Does he have some old school tendencies of likes running the football and likes defense first? I get that. Passing is now the sexy thing in the NFL. You want Sean McVay's, you want Clint Kingsbury, you want these new NFL young head coaches. But I do think he's done a great job at turning around the culture of the Vikings and in general knows how to win. Last year, I was shocked on just how I thought the Vikings defense would still be at least passable, even with Danielle Hunter going out and whatnot and having a bunch of rookies and no OTAs in training camp. I thought Zimmer was going to be able to cook up enough defense still, even with unproven and rookies around that defense. But I think it also showed that how much they missed that training camp and how much they missed all that time together. But in general, I'm a big Mike Zimmer fan. I do think he's probably coaching for his job this season, long-term wise. They need to have a playoff win or two to probably solidify his case to stick around.
Yeah.
But 7 years of what he's been able to do, I mean, it's pretty damn impressive. So, yeah, I'm a pretty big Mike Zimmer stan.
I also think we don't probably because we talk about Cousins and Zimmer a lot, but I think we probably haven't talked about enough in this town the seemingly shotgun marriage of coach and quarterback that Spielman forced too.
Zimmer never wanted this marriage,
but that's my point,
right? Like, but this was yes, you're 100% right.
It's a pre-arranged marriage. It's an old school. You are going to marry this quarterback, but I don't want to.
And Spielman as the father in this situation is like,
yes.
If you don't make this marriage work, then we're gonna have to let you go from the family. And he's like, I never asked for this marriage to begin with.
Right, Dad.
I mean, the guy I wanted to get married to had his leg destroyed in a freak accident.
Right, and Mike also was. Mike didn't want to marry Case Keenum, but I think, and he made this incredibly clear at the combine before they signed Kirk. He wanted to marry a quarterback who I think he thought could do the job, but wouldn't break the bank completely. Now that might be a mistake too. I don't know. But the point is, I don't think that we've given that enough discussion. I mean, the one thing where we owe Everson Griffin a big thank you is he told the truth. Like Kirk Cousins' ass was the headline, but the meat of that story is ask Mike if he ever wanted Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Well, a few things just to go back to some of the things you guys just said. So, Judd, you brought up shelf life, that, hey, regardless of whether you're a great coach or not, like sometimes 6, 7, 8 years is the extent of your shelf life with an organization. I'm going to push back on that, and that I think that shelf life starting to reach its expiration date is more driven by fans and media than it is oftentimes by players, because players cycle out. Mike Zimmer is not coaching the same players now largely. I mean, he's still coaching Harrison Smith. There's a few guys. Harrison Smith, Anthony Barr. Like, he's not coaching the same players, though, for the most part, now as he did in 2015 or 2016. The rosters turn over. Mm-hmm. Now, is Rick Spielman still his boss? Yes. Are the Wilves still his bosses? Yes. And so could those relationships fray over time? Yes. But I think mostly when we think of shelf life, it's just time for a change. I honestly think that's driven by the fans feel like it's time for a change, or the media feels like it's time for a change, more than the players and the and then the organization starts to feel that from fans and media because now they're getting questioned about this guy. And then look at the NFL. I can tell you right now, like, how many coaches So it's 2021. Half the league was hired in the last 3 years, right?
Right.
So is it just that in hockey's worse? But like, is it just that every 3 or 4 years you just got to get a new voice in there, or are organizations, fan bases, and media just super impatient and just need to fire anyone the minute that they slip up? That's how I see it.
They're impatient, and hockey is especially weird. So that's almost a whole different animal, I think, completely. But when it comes to a guy like Mike, though, Phil, yes, the players cycle out, but it becomes very clear when your message is working, and it becomes very clear because it's not like players purposely are like, unless the coach is bad. I don't think they're purposely like, we hate you, we're not going to listen. But you can tell when a team buys in, and you can tell when a team doesn't. And part of the thing with Mike is, I think there's times where Mike being abrupt and upfront probably helps, but there's also a point in time where he's done it so much that it loses its effectiveness. So that's what I'm saying is, because I get it. Players come and go, but some guys stay, and you could definitely tell. I mean, heck, an example of this, not in the exact same way as Mike, but an example is probably Gardy too. You know, at some point in time, what worked for him in 2003 started not working as well, or flat out didn't work. And it wasn't that it was the same guys, but you could tell that the act had grown thin and it wasn't working, and that becomes a problem. And by the way, I'm not saying that this team is definitively there with Mike, but I do think that all goes into how much is the message getting across. And the guys like Tomlin and Belichick are just very rare breeds, and good for those teams, and they're good coaches. But I think that factors into the equation, and I don't think it's all us. I think it is how the locker room perceives you and how they go about either responding to your message and or flat out sort of ignoring it.
By the way, this dissection of Mike Zimmer presented also in part by PXG Minneapolis. So PXG has been presenting top shelf golf clubs to golfers around the Twin Cities and around the country for a while now. It's a hot brand. They make some great clubs. They've got great apparel. You probably see some PXG logos out and about on golf courses now. They're picking up momentum, and you can step into the golfer's paradise that is PXG Minneapolis in Southdale Center and find out more at pxg.com/Minneapolis. So to me, the biggest knock on Zimmer and the biggest thing that I would want to see before, giving him an extension or extra seasons or whatever it is, his record against teams that finish the season 500 or above, actually teams that finish above 500, so 9-7 or better, he only wins 29% of those games. That's worse than Bill O'Brien before he got fired. It's worse than Dan Quinn. It's worse than Jason Garrett. It's worse than, Mike McCarthy had a good run with the Packers, but it's worse than Mike McCarthy, John Harbaugh. So by comparison, Zimmer wins 29% of games against winning teams. Belichick wins almost 70%. Now, of course, he's had Tom Brady for 20 years. But this is data just from 2014 through 20 when Mike Zimmer has been the coach of the Vikings. Andy Reid, almost 60% wins against above 500 teams. Pete Carroll, almost 60%. Mike Tomlin, 55%. Sean Payton, kind of coin flippy. So most coaches have losing records against teams that finish the season with a winning record, so that's not a crime. But 29% is really low. What do you think the main reason or reasons are for Zimmer and his teams not winning games against teams that finish the season with a winning record?
I'm going to give you a reason you might not like, but I have seen it before, and I especially saw it with Childress. And I think Mike has the same tendency, and I think it's a bad starting point. I think when the Vikings are going to play a really good team, Mike gets wound so tight that week that the players go into that game tight. And I'll give you the example of where Brad Childress and Mike Zimmer share the exact same thing. Anytime the Vikings are about to play the Patriots, those guys are as uptight as you could possibly get. It's almost like they are personally going to play Belichick. Like, I got to go against Belichick. It's going to be tough on the field.
I think a lot of teams probably feel that way.
They do, but what I'm saying is, think about weeks where the Vikings have been about to play a really good team. Mike gets wound very, very tight, and I don't think that especially with today's younger humans, I don't think that's a big help. I think people need to go in somewhat confident but relaxed as well. And I think that presents not the entire problem, but I think it's part of the stew that we probably don't discuss enough because it's hard to quantify. And I feel like today, if things are hard to quantify, we try and dismiss them like, well, that's too tough to talk about. But let's talk about the analytics. And it's like, okay, that's part of it too. But let's also talk about the human factors that go into being successful. I mean, hell, Phil, it's true in business, right? Like there's quantifiable things about the approach that a person takes going into a big transaction. There's quantifiable things about people who are successful and what makes them work and what makes them tick. And I don't think it helps people tick when your starting point for like a huge game is, okay, it's going to be tough. We got to bear down. And you're like, okay, but it's supposed to be fun too. We're supposed to have fun, right? And Mike's not a fun, Mike's like, no, this is going to be tough. So I actually think that plays a role, and I'm sure there are some people watching or listening to this who will dismiss this and be like, that's typical Zolgad. He doesn't know, but I've seen it in teams I cover.
Well, the other thing you could say, if you just look at the 4 coaches since Mike Zimmer was hired as Vikings coach, the 4 coaches that are above 500 against winning teams and their quarterbacks are Tom Brady, Pat Mahomes for about half of that time, and Alex Smith. Alex Smith was a good quarterback, and I think Alex Smith had some big games against, like, he had a couple big playoff games if memory serves. Russell Wilson, Ben Roethlisberger. So we're talking about 4 first ballot Hall of Fame quarterbacks attached to those coaches.
Yep.
And
very fair.
One of the biggest knocks on this iteration of the Vikings is that the current quarterback, as talented as he is and accurate and as big of numbers as he can put up, he doesn't. And I don't want to put all of the team wins and that record on one person.
Hater.
Well, man, you should see my timeline yesterday on Twitter. Oh my God.
It probably looked like mine on Sunday.
But he doesn't rise up in the biggest moments against the best teams.
Yep.
And we've looked up some of the numbers, like when his teams are down by 1 or 2 scores, last 6 minutes, fourth quarter, he's one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. And there's a few reasons for that, but when that's the driver of, like, the quarterback is driving wins and losses more than any other player on the roster, bar none.
Mm-hmm.
And when your quarterback has that reputation, it also gets attached to you. And when your quarterback doesn't play well in those instances, hey, we need one drive right now, and it's a 3-and-out against the Titans, right? I would be curious, what would Mike Zimmer's career look like if you just gave him like a fully developed Russell Wilson for 6 years?
Okay,
I think we'd be
sure.
talking about a different narrative and reality against winning teams.
So let's be fair here. Let's take Cousins out of the discussion entirely, because I feel like he's such a Maurer-like lightning rod that in any discussion where we broach his name becomes, well, you hate him, so this conversation shouldn't be being had. Let's take him out entirely, and let's go to one. Let's dissect one big game in particular. And I realize it's against a good team, but I feel like that's the whole point of this part of our discussion.
Yes.
2017 NFC title game, Eagles. Okay.
EAGLES. Eagles.
Go Eagles. Go Eagles. Now, I'm not saying that the Vikings shouldn't have lost that game, but the manner in which they did was a complete embarrassment for a team that had been as good as they were on both sides of the ball, and especially defensively, right? Like, to me, that's a loss worth dissecting off the question that you just asked, because when you think about it, you go into that game, you're coming off a huge win, and in which basically they all said, well, we celebrated so much off the Minneapolis Miracle that we got blown out. Okay, that's not a real excuse. That's not like a viable. Okay.
I don't think they did. I feel like that's like retroactively you can kind of be like, maybe we didn't focus enough.
I think that's a really intriguing Zimmer loss, because that's on him too. Like, Blair Walsh misses the field goal in 2015. And could Mike have made Blair very nervous? Yes, but I mean, Blair Walsh missed a field goal he's got to make. So that's a hard one to dissect as far as Mike goes. But I really think that the NFC title game loss is a really good starting point for looking at the record that you just gave and saying, okay, why in a big game where you supposedly have a defense that was damn good and you did, why are you getting blown out like that so badly where it's just basically an embarrassing loss?
Yeah, and I think there's also something to be said, too, throughout Zimmer's career is his strategy of conservative offense and lean on defense to win games. Is that the best strategy to put yourself in a position to win the most regular season games so that you can play home playoff games, right?
Yep.
You know, because I feel like the Vikings, especially offensively, it's like I feel like they have more weapons and more talent. The offensive lines have been an issue for them, and I get that. So I'm not saying it's a perfectly crafted offense personnel-wise, but are they calling plays and creating an environment to maximize the amount of wins they can tally in the regular season under Zimmer? And I would argue they're playing a little bit more close to the vest style philosophically. Mm-hmm. Like they're looking to avoid turnovers, which teams should be, but like there's almost an over obsession with it. Like, oh, we're going to run the ball on second and short and just get the first down, as opposed to running play action 3 extra times and throwing a deep pass on those downs where the whole playbook is open. And so I don't think, unless they find a way to get home field advantage so they don't have to go to Philadelphia and be subject to that crowd and that momentum. You know, once Case Keenum threw the pick 6 in that game, everything kind of snowballed from there. I don't think, like, he can throw that pick 6 at home, and I don't think it snowballs. I mean, it definitely sucks, and it's a huge momentum turn, but I don't think the game turns into 38-7 or whatever it was, and it's just over from that point if you're playing a home game.
Yeah.
So how are they maximizing the regular season is another big part of this discussion.
That's very true. So if you go through what you just said then, though, what's intriguing about it is you could make the case very solidly that you should open up things more, trust the quarterback more, and try and go on the offensive more often during the course of the season, because your template should work in the playoffs, which is where defense can be absolutely key. But that's what makes going back to the Eagles game so weird, is you got to that game. Like that was a cold, January day in Philadelphia. Like that should have been a grinded out, okay, Case Keenum sort of falls apart, but you got your defense, right?
Mm-hmm. Against their backup quarterback too.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's Mike's pride and joy. Like that was a Zim game. That's the blueprint. And your defense was awful.
Yeah.
And so that's where I just go to, it's an interesting, I think Mike is a good football coach, and I think he knows his stuff on defense for sure. But I think that there's definitely a discussion to be had about certain situations and games, and as you gave the stat, against winning teams, because that becomes incredibly important, and that's one place where he has definitely struggled.
You know, one more thing on this. I think what would happen if things don't go well for him this year and he does get fired, I think he would be the first guy swooped up as a defensive coordinator. I don't know which teams are going to have openings, but like someone's going to instantly hire him to be maybe Dallas. You know, I know who's their defensive coordinator this year? They just
Dan
fired
Quinn, who was the Falcons head coach, because they fired their.
So and Dan Quinn has a pedigree too. Wasn't he the defensive coordinator for that Super Bowl winning Seahawks team
for the Seahawks
a few years ago? So
yep.
But like he'll get swooped up right away, and I wouldn't be surprised if he wins the Super Bowl as a coordinator at some point. If he doesn't. If things don't go well this year for the Vikings.
I wonder if he would get one more head coaching shot.
He should.
Like he's older, so that's
if
not
he wants
going to help him. But I feel like, well, first of all, with Mike being Mike, I think there's 1,000% chance that he would want that shot. And I do think that he would. It would be so if he got blown out. Just quickly, it would be so interesting to hear his conversation with his next potential employer. To hear him basically say, we had a plan. We had Teddy. We had a defense. And then I got Kirk. They gave me Kirk. Shotgun marriage.
Yeah, that's 100% what he would say, I'm sure.
So, I heard it all week long, right? 0-9 on Monday night. Yeah. You like how this tastes?
Just the line. All right. All right. We're gonna take a deep breath here. We're going to pause for a second, and we're gonna come back with Write That Down and an accountability session. This is where we admit that we were wrong. When are you guys going to admit that you were wrong?
Everyone's
coming up next.